Shape. We're going to go ahead and call our legislative committee meeting to order. I would like to recognize or ask if there's any public comment or people that might wish to address the legislative committee. We're good. Consent agenda items. We have our legislative committee meeting minutes from January 17th, 2020. Have a motion and a second. Accept them for our records. All in favor? Aye. So carried. Information items, RSA State Legislative Update.
Ron Pierce is on the way. He was
wait him out.
Traffic himself.
We'll wait him out. Then, since he's the main topic, is there any other discussion by board members or committee members that would like to visit with us about until he gets here? How far is he out?
Had heard he was on the bridge, I believe. That was several minutes.
Well, the accident was right there at the intersection. I mean, it's just past where you peel off on 275. So.
David, maybe you want to talk about your trip to Tallahassee?
That'd be a great thing to talk about, David.
It was wonderful. Everything was great. No issues. All the items that we had on our agenda were going through without any trouble at all. The funding sounded like it was in good shape as well. It was heard for the second time on the House floor this week, and it made it through, or excuse me, committee, second committee discussion, and it's supposed to go to the House floor next. But RSA didn't seem to have any concerns about anything, and nobody had any issues. Met with several legislators while I was there. Lots of support. Everybody's happy with what's happening at TBARTA, and looking forward to another successful year.
Across the board, it's a good feeling. Even at the governor's office, that's unusual for everybody to be in sync. Well, we can't start another committee until it's advertised to start, so we got some time to burn. So we just go around the room. John, anything going on in Hernando County we need to know about?
Not this time.
Give us an update on China, because I know you've got some.
I heard listening to the Wall Street Journal, just that it's starting to, like they maybe it peaked, that virus, the coronavirus, and getting under control. So I'm telling.
I have a close friend of mine whose son is there, and he's been quarantined to his room. He can't come out.
Who's that?
Natalie Kaler's son.
Okay.
He can't come. He's quarantined to his room right now.
Wasn't it interesting that they brought back the 14 infected folks on the same plane? I would have.
With some sort of petition to separate good from bad. I don't know how that works.
Yeah, how is that going to make a difference?
I was glad our government went and got the ones out of that cruise ship, though.
Yeah, no, I
It
know,
was
but
the
I
right
wish
thing
they'd
to do.
put them on
Yeah,
separate
absolutely
planes.
right.
I mean, at the very least, they could have done that.
Well, they have a portable compartment they can put in there that's pretty much contained, and it has seats inside. It's like a small Connex.
Oh, is
Inside
it?
the plane?
Inside the plane, yeah, because they used a large 747 cargo plane to bring them back, and they just put what I would call portable seats in there for all the passengers, and then they rolled in this container. Usually holds somewhere between 20 and 24 people, so 14 people in there would have been comfortable, although you are in a box.
I heard it wasn't like business class.
No, it wasn't, definitely not business class, more like a troop mover, if you will, but it was a fairly large container. I believe it's either a 20 TEU, I believe they call it, so it's a conference. And they rolled it in there. When I saw the pictures, I'm like, okay, no, it's with you.
Complete with orange radiation lights.
Yeah, little thing to keep that.
You know, the ships are having so much problem because it's gotten in their system.
Yeah, they're
Their air conditioning system?
Yeah, so they don't want to keep them in the ships because they're having problems getting it out of the ship.
Well, I thought
I guess
that was
it's gotten in their plumbing, but
Yeah.
You know, you leave them in the ship, it just turns to be a big feature.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I thought the plane would be sort of the same thing, but if it's, you know,
It get in a box.
Especially those inner cabins that don't have any windows at all, and they can't leave.
yeah,
Must be crowded.
several of which are completely underwater.
goodness. And then the origins of it, you know, coming through a food market, through the bat infecting the other wildlife that they ate, and that's how it was transmitted.
Raw bats, that's always been on my list of things to nibble on.
Is it? No, it wasn't actually that they ate the bat, it was the
Oh, is
bat
it fried, were they
infected.
fried?
They don't know what, I haven't heard what the bat infected, but the bat infected something else
That
that
they
was
ate.
sold in the food market, and so that's how it started, according to.
You've seen pictures of their food market, everything in there is live.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, it's, China's very interesting.
Want to see if you can get Rod on the phone?
I just texted him, he said he was less than 5 minutes out.
Can you feel comfortable giving a report on the penny ordinance? Chair, I'd like to ask council, maybe he can just, since it's transit related and transportation related, if he could just give us an update on what's happening with the penny tax, surtax there in town.
We were just talking about it, maybe you'd like to give it a.
Alan would know the legal ramifications. We're still waiting for the Supreme Court to make the final decision. I think if people are poised on either side of that decision, if you will, whether it's a positive decision or a negative decision to kick it back. I know I talked with All for Transportation. They're ready if it is approved, and they're ready if it's not approved. And the thought process is if it is kicked back to more or less redo, they're in position to do that, and they will march forward with doing that. They're not going to let that ride. I've also heard some rumblings that there's another effort being made to possibly move a half cent tax to the voters also. Now-
Could it go in the same ballot?
Well, I think what would happen is if everything is done and ready, then we would stick with the 1 cent and discard the half cent. If everything's not ready, then there's a thought process, move the half cent because it may be ready. And then at least we have something out there in terms of funding for transportation in the region.
So this is my question. So if the Supreme Court doesn't rule before it needs to go on the ballot,
Good-
is that the
good point.
issue?
It is one of the main issues, yes, the timing of it.
Alan?
And I think anybody,
Well-
go ahead, Alan.
Maybe you're not familiar with what the county commission did on Wednesday.
Go ahead.
So the Hillsborough County Commission on Wednesday, 6-1, to direct staff to come back with an ordinance establishing to put a 1 cent,
Okay.
30-year tax back on the ballot for
Right.
November 2020, with a split of 40% to Hart, 59% to be split between the county and the 3 cities, and then 1% to the MPO.
A 1% to the MPO.
Yeah. Which is what
Was that the original?
Yeah.
No,
No.
there was originally 1% to the MPO, but the original split, Hart got 45%. But the motion that passed, which was Commissioner Miller's proposal, was 40% for Hart. They set the public hearing for April 1st, so the ordinance will be on the agenda for public hearing on April 1st. If they approve the ordinance on April 1st, it'll be on the ballot in November. There'll
That's-
probably be some language in there addressing what happens if the Supreme Court issues an opinion that upholds the tax. Because obviously they can only have one.
1 cent, I know.
Right.
And then we discussed with the commission, the possibility that we may have to come back to them and talk about what to do in September or November if we still don't have a Supreme Court decision by then. That part's kind of up in the air, but the deadline to get it on the ballot for November 3rd is May 2nd.
Yeah.
So.
It's looming in our mind too.
We need to, if they want to do something, they need to adopt the ordinance and have it up to a PAGA by May 2nd. So they didn't want to wait.
So that's just slightly different. I heard it was a half cent, and I knew Les
Well-
Miller was running it.
Les's original proposal was a half
Half
cent,
cent.
and then he changed his mind over the weekend. And on Monday, I think it was late Monday, he changed his proposal to 1 cent.
Yeah, I think his was originally a half cent and 35% to 100, and changed to a cent.
And in the new amendment that's going to be on 2020 ballot? What did they have to fix? I mean, what exactly, because they didn't have the authority to how to spend it. They can obviously collect the tax, but what do they have to fix in the ballot?
The main concern that some of the members of the court expressed with what was done in 2018 was that it was the voters that was deciding how to use the money, and not the county commission.
This puts the authority back in the county
This
commission.
puts the authority in the county commission as to how to spend it.
So going back to the 59%, half to the county, and then the
No,
other
so
half to the
they-
three cities?
What Commissioner Mills' proposal is to do it on a population-based
Base?
calculation, which
Good morning, Ron.
I believe it works out.
Sorry, we have a traffic problem
The
in
county
the
actually, yes,
I know, I was in it. I just got
a
through
little
it.
more than half.
You're up, so you can pull up the mic as soon as you're ready.
I'm ready when you are, so.
So it's a population-based calculation that would be made.
Which is part two.
Mr. Chair, I apologize for
equitable.
being late. Traffic is horrible, did you know?
You're on time because Ron's here with you.
I know, we walked in together.
I rode with Commissioner Wong. She was my ride this morning.
I see. Nobody else. But go ahead, you're up.
Yeah,
So-
Mr. Chairman, quick update for everybody. So we are at the end of week 6, day 39 in Tallahassee. We have 3 weeks left. Committee meetings will be wrapping up in Tallahassee next week, and really week 8 and 9 for the most part. House and Senate will be on the floor. From an appropriation standpoint, nothing's changed since our last meeting. We're $1.5 million in the House budget. We're not in the Senate budget, which is pretty ironic. We thought we'd be in the Senate budget, not in the House budget, which means we're well positioned. The $1.5 million is probably what we're gonna get. We're not gonna get any additional dollars above and beyond that. I think for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're still doing the feasibility study for the projects from last year. Nobody's asked for, and there was nobody else that asked for additional dollars this year, so I think this year we'll get the 1.5. Now Debbie's gonna pass out when I say this, is, it will probably come out of the trust fund again.
It'll come out of the what?
Out of the transportation trust fund. Now, what we're trying to do is clarify, through staff, and I may have to try to do some proviso language as a part of the budget process to make it very clear that, A, it's not done on a reimbursement standpoint, that it's done, if it's 1.5 million in operations, it's for operations. It's kind of hard to get reimbursed for operations if you don't have the dollars to be able to do the operation. So, the other option we have, and I've already talked to DOT about this, is there may be an opportunity to take the 1.5 million not out of the district non-recurring projects and possibly take it out of like a pot of money out of Tallahassee. So I'm already having conversations with DOTs. Can we do that? That way, we're not having to, number one, we'd work with Tallahassee versus working with District 7, and more importantly, the way local DOT interprets when these projects come down, if the 1.5 is non-recurring and there's other projects that are out there, they're gonna take the 1.5 million from other projects that are already out there. Like last year, they took money from PSTA, they took money from HART. And by the way, it wasn't just a Tampa Bay thing, that was all across the state. So just know, like, that's what DOT does. DOT basically says, look, we have a set pot of money. So if you're taking 1.5 and non-recurring, the only thing you're doing is you're just shuffling money around to be able to make that work. We fully anticipate we'll get the 1.5. I don't think that's the issue. I think the ultimate issue is gonna be making sure that we clarify that it's not done in a reimbursement standpoint, and if there's an opportunity for us to be able to do further clarification to try to get the money out of Tallahassee versus having District 7 move money around. Questions,
Questions
comments?
for
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Long?
Ron, I know you're well-connected in all the different areas of Tallahassee, but I do think it would be wise if there was a way to ask the chair of TED to talk to Jimmy Petronas. I'm going to be there, as you know, on March 3rd, and my intent is to try to meet with him. But if his folks in the Department of Financial Services are not releasing our money, that we're already have sent invoices in, and between Debbie and David, they have met with the folks that are guiding that process to firmly tie it down and dot the i's and cross the t's. And when I tell you they've certainly met more than once. And are following the guidelines that they have been given. But then, when they sign off on it here locally, it goes up to Tallahassee, as you know, and they're raising all kinds of issues up there again, after we've already addressed them here. So there's a few of us that can't help but think that maybe they have a little angst with TBARTA because of how we conducted ourselves in the past. But that was a new day, and it's very difficult for TBARTA to get their bills paid and/or keep their employees if they can't pay them. The money is due us, but we have to expend it, as you know. And now, if we're not careful, we're going to end up in a real mess again.
And Mr. Chair, if I can address
Yes.
that, Commissioner, I think there's a couple things that are happening. I think number one is, when DOT was audited, that'd be last year, I think they were
Yeah,
done.
well, last calendar year, yes.
Their hands were slapped a little bit on how they
I
were
get
dealing with
that.
that. So my guess is they're under a microscope because of that. It may be helpful for us to set up a meeting with CFO Petronas, where you're in Tallahassee.
That's my point in trying to meet with him.
So we'll do that, so yes.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, Ron, can you go through, I don't see the mechanism how we could get the money from GR or other pots other than from the trust fund, given what my understanding of the way DOT works. Is there what kind of mechanism and what is the real, political viability of doing that?
So for this year, I think we'll be happy with the 1.5 million in non-recurring from the trust fund, and we'll thank the legislature and move on. We have a longer one-way until the 2021 session. I think, I've already started this conversation with DOT, is it's not viable for us to come back every year and keep asking for $1.5 million. It's just not. At some point in time, they're gonna say no, and you're gonna have a huge hole in the budget at that point, because you're spending the money, your budget is that the 1.5 is going to be there. I think the way we solve it is, we start having conversations with DOT over the summer, and have them include 1.5 million as a part of DOT's base budget to the governor next year. I think the governor's office would be supportive of that. And more importantly, I think the Senate, I think the incoming Senate President Wilton Simpson would also be very supportive of that as well.
Just program it into their funding.
Program it
plan.
into their funding as a part of the recurring base, and that way, in the future, we don't have to run around Tallahassee every session looking for 1.5 million with it. And by the way, the other thing we can do is, if it's part of their base, we can get incremental increases as well as a part of that too, because 1.5 may need to grow to 2 or something in the future as well.
Well, it also engenders hostile feelings within District 7 DOT, because then they have to take money from other sources that they programmed into that for us.
Yes, sir.
So all around, I think it's a better option to see what
In the state's budget, not District 7, it'd be the
It'd be
state's,
part of
for
the,
overall budget.
it'd be part of
state's
DOT's
DOT.
base budget. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, it seems very logical. Yes.
May I?
Commissioner Long.
So I'm all about trying to get us into the base budget, Ron. My concern is, we are very quickly going to be on a trajectory actually getting stuff done. And I would like to suggest that instead of trying to get it in the base budget at 1.5, we try to get it in the base budget at 2. I know it's not easy, but consider that if it's not in the base budget at 2, which gives us a little bit of wiggle room, the only alternatives we have for operational, as I understand it, please correct me if I'm wrong, Debbie, is that it really impacts our staff, and we are soon going to be trying to do something for District 7 in their issues they have down in Manatee. And so as those things happen, here's what I see. You, David, and the staff are going to be coming back to us in local government to up our contribution at TBARTA. And though I'm certainly willing for us, Pinellas County, to do our part, I don't think local governments should be all about trying to fund the operations when this is a regional effort and we have regional partners, and the state should be a partner and not be trying to tie our hands every time we try to do something positive for our citizens.
Agreed, and we can, whatever number you put in, it has to be defendable. The one thing I would caution you on is, you can put $5 million in there. It just has to be, we have to be able to defend that, whatever that number, ultimate number is. And remember too is, once we start building stuff, so once we start, you know, if BRT is something we're partnering with DOT on, and the state's funding, you know, the BRT project, there should be ways for us to be able to get some administrative costs through the building and operations of the BRT as well. So I would hope in the future that whatever the base number, if it's 1.5, 2, 3, or 4, whatever the number happens to be, there are other ways through the actual DOT work program, as they're funding additional projects that we're involved with, there'd be ways for us to be able to get funding off of those as well. Let me touch really quick on our legislation in Tallahassee. Our House bill has passed its last committee yesterday. Representative Diamond's doing a fantastic job. It now goes to the floor. The Senate bill will be in its last committee of reference next week, we believe, in the Rules Committee. It will then go to the floor. This is what's in the final piece of legislation, and this is what's going to pass. There's nothing with regards to electronic voting. For committees, so we cannot do anything for electronic voting. So you have to be in person at a board meeting to vote. Their concern's not us. It's Pandora's box they're opening by allowing us to do it. Their concern is, well, who's next? So, and I'll be honest with you, it is hard for me to argue this, right? Because everywhere I went, you know, I thought I'm making progress. This is great. So they asked the question of, if you're appointed to a board, shouldn't you want to show up? It's kind of hard to defend. Well, I get we're a regional board, and they kept talking. There's other regional boards, and bottom line is, there's nothing in the board with regard to regional, you know, with regard to electronic voting. Now the good news is everything else we wanted in there's in there. Number one, the mayors can appoint an alternate. The mayor, the alternate has to be a voting member of the city council, and that alternate has to be approved by the city council, which is normal, by the way. Typically, when they do their organizational sessions, they do it as county commissioners, they do it as city council. When you all vote for your respective boards you're all going to serve on, sometimes you vote for alternates as well. We'll just be a part of that process, which is easy. The quorum issue we wanted solves the quorum issue. The new quorum definition basically is it's 7 people, and they actually put a definition of a quorum in there, which is 50% plus 1 of the voting membership. That's it. That's all that it says. So this idea of, you know, having to do, you know, quorum 7, but you have to have 7 voting members to conduct business. That voting members that conduct business is just eliminated. It's just, you have 7 people. So if you have 7 people conducting business and it's a 4-3 vote, that issue would pass. It does take the CCC, the Chairs Coordinating Council, stick it back over under the MPOs. And the last thing, which is kind of a bonus for us, is at the very end of the TBARTA implementing the Enabling Act, it lists all of our committees. You shouldn't be that prescriptive in state law to see what our committees are, because hypothetically, if you wanted to create another committee, change the name of a committee, why would we do that? So we just eliminate that section altogether. So the good news is, if you want to create a committee or change names of committees, we don't have to go up to Tallahassee and change that. That's eliminated. So we believe that the bill's on track to pass. We don't have any issues. I would suspect it's probably going to be heard in the Rules Committee in the Senate next week, which means we're probably going to be up in the House. If not next week, I think we'd be up sometime at the beginning of week 8. I think the Senate would probably have it up sometime towards the end of week 8 to week 9. But hopefully the next time I come give you an update, that bill will pass and go to the governor. We expect 0 issues with the governor's office. We've already had some initial conversations, and they have no concerns with the direction that we're going with any of the legislation. Questions?
Excellent report. Any questions? Any more questions? Thank you, Ron.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Great
Great
report.
job.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're about the end of the legislative.
Can I ask one question?
Yes,
Ron,
David.
would you mind giving everybody an update on the MCORS conversation, the Regional Transportation Disadvantaged Service?
So there's a $10 million pot of money last year that was part of MCORS that was specifically for transportation disadvantage. And it's more for regional transportation disadvantage. What they were trying to do is incentivize TNCs, Uber, Lyft, and others to create projects where they would be able to go in and do transportation disadvantage projects. The challenge has been is many of the TNCs haven't applied for it because their issue is if you apply for it, you're then the ones that are responsible for doing all of the, making sure that people are qualified to use transportation disadvantage dollars. And Uber and Lyfts of the world are going, we don't want to do that. We just want to be able to provide the ride. We want to be able to, somebody pushes a button, we know they qualify, they go from point A to point B. So we've talked to the Senate President's office about the concept of why wouldn't a regional transportation or transit authority be able to apply for those dollars, partnering with the TNC? And the argument back to us is, well, why couldn't the TNC apply and partner with the regional transit or transportation authority? So we're trying to get some clarification on allowing us to be able to tap into those dollars, working with a TNC. It would have to be with the TNC currently, the way the legislation is written. But what David's hearing is, I know in the region, a lot of folks are really having conversations about transportation disadvantage rides don't end at the county line. So in right now, the way a lot of these programs are, designed, a lot of people don't want to, we can't go across the bridge, drop the person off, have somebody else pick them up and continue into Hillsborough. It just doesn't work that way. So is there a way potentially for us to be able to partner with groups that are more on a regional basis? And the punchline is, I don't think they're willing to change the legislation from last year, but I think they're looking at being creative potentially on, is there a way for us to be able to qualify, even if it's using the TNC as the applicant? And I think David and I need to kind of work through that, because that becomes a little bit messy, is what does that look like? Make sure, you'd have to have a really, really strong MLU and contract to make sure that who's responsible ultimately for making sure that people are qualified, number one. And number two is, how do we get paid? If Uber, Lyft, and whoever the TNC is doing the rides, but we're the ones that are helping make sure that the people qualify and, in advertising it and getting rides for them, how does that work? So we're kind of stumbling our way through that at the moment. I don't think they want to change the legislation. Since I got, they don't want to go back and change enforce this year, but I think they're willing to work with us and try to find a creative solution where TBARTA can be a part of the equation.
Thank you. Without any other business, that we'll adjourn the Finance Committee and move on, I think, to the Policy Committee.
This was the legislative committee, wasn't it?
Oh,
Yeah,
Legislative Committee.
Thank you.
And move to the Policy Committee.
How about finance?
How about finance first?
All right, Finance.
So, all right, so on our agenda for today, there are some information items with regard to our finances and our finance committee work. Debbie and I and David met a couple days ago, and I'm assuming there are no problems with the minutes. Have you all gotten a chance to take a look at the minutes? So let's go to the information items, which is an update from Debbie with regard to our agreement with Pilot Grant, which I understand is not ready for us
Need
to.
public comment, I think.
Well, first of all, you need to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve. Yeah, second.
Oh, that's right.
You have a motion and a second.
We have a motion and a second. How about everybody in favor?
Aye.
And we have a gentleman, I didn't see you come in, I apologize, you're sitting behind me, would you like to identify yourself?
Yes, I'm Bill Roberts. I serve on this board's Citizens Advisory.
Welcome, thank you for being here and taking your time. And here is Cassandra. Okay. All right.
Just ask if there's no public other than Mr. Roberts, but ask if there's public comment.
Would any other person here like to speak under public comments? Thank you so much, Alan, for keeping me straight. Okay. The line of credit is not ready yet, right, Debbie, for us to take action on?
That
You're
is,
still working on it.
that is correct, and it is definitely a work in progress. Pilot Bank has been very willing to work with us, but what we're finding is there's a real disconnect between what they normally do is commercial lines of credit and government. And Alan and his team, Dwayne Draper, have been great, but there's a lot of work to change the actual documents. The loan officer we've been working with has been very cooperative, but once he goes back to the lending committees, the language that we got back in all the documents, right, Alan, we had a lot of red lines that needed to be changed, so we're still working on it, unfortunately. But they're very cooperative, too.
So hopefully we'll get that done by the time we meet next. And, okay, so that takes care of our information items. On for our discussion and action items. We have the January 2020 financials, which Debbie, or Melanie, I'm sorry, I keep referring to her because you're not usually with us when we speak, but she can go over those should you be interested in the detail. And before she does, I would like to say that Tyndale Oliver, who was one of our very valuable consultants, has not been paid since in the last 4 months. And so that totals about $149,000, Debbie?
Correct.
$149,000. And it's not because we haven't sent the invoices. This is one of the examples I was trying to give you, Ron, of not being able to take care of business. So it's hung up in the department in Tallahassee, and it's one of the issues that I would very much like have the opportunity to talk to Mr. Petronas about, because this is not a good way to run our agency, not being able to pay our bills. And, you know, while they have been very good and willing partners for us, I'm not sure how much longer they're just going to keep on doing the work without getting paid. Plus, it's just not the right thing to do. So we're making progress, but we need to get that taken care of. Okay, Melanie, please.
Okay, so if you have your packet, in January, we ended up with a net surplus of about $480,638. And so this was $23,305 above our budgeted number for January of $457,333. So looking at the revenues, we were under budget by $1.4 million, and this was due to the state funding with the timing of the PD&E and technology project. Going on to the under budget for the expenses of $1.4 million. The breakdown of that was about $102,000 was for salaries and fringe benefits, and that was due to the vacant positions that we have open. And then professional services kind of offset the PD&E and technology study that we were under budget for the revenue. And then here you have the advertising and marketing, which is $79,000, and then the commuter assistance program, which is due to the under budget amount for the van pool and Pick My Kids. So moving on to the balance sheet here, our accounts receivable as of January is approximately $1.6 million. Which offsets accounts payable about $660,000. So even though that our AR is $1.6 million, our AP is lower, which is a pretty good thing right now. And at the end of the month in January, we had a cash balance of about $33,000. And that kind of summarizes my report in a nutshell.
Thank you, Melanie. Any questions, anyone? Good news is there's money in the bank a little bit.
Yeah.
I do think I heard you say, Melanie, vacant positions. What positions are those?
Michael, we have budgeted for Michael. Michael is no longer as of December, so we had that in the initial budget. And then we have a position open for procurement and grants manager.
And not to be micromanaging, but how are we going to pay for the procurement and grants manager person when we're already having issues with the payroll we have?
We do have it included in our budget.
You do?
Mm-hmm. It's in the FY20 budget.
Michael's position was budgeted to disappear and then be replaced with a procurement and grants person, so that is in the budget.
Okay, so we're not vacant 2, we're vacant 1? Okay, I didn't understand that.
Right, but it's under budget because we budgeted for Michael at the time we did the budget. So his
Correct.
salary is included along with the budgeted for the grants manager position.
Okay, good to know. All right, any other questions with regard to the January financials? I don't see any, no? Okay, good. All right, so moving on to action item B, the PSTA Bus on Shoulder demonstration project is being taken care of from a $30,000 federal grant on vehicle equipment. Correct, David? Is there anything else you'd like to say about that?
Yes, Brian can give a
Brian.
report.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, so this is an action item. We're seeking approval on a memorandum of understanding with PSTA. District 7 and PSTA are going to be doing a bus and shoulder demonstration on I-275 between downtown St. Pete and Guinea Boulevard. FDOT is going to be installing ramp meters at the on-ramps to 38th Avenue and 54th Avenue that will regulate the flow of traffic coming onto the interstate. And DOT has agreed to install technology on the ramp meters that will temporarily hold vehicles at the on-ramp while a PSTA bus is passing by on the shoulder. District 7 has asked PSTA to purchase the onboard vehicle technology that's going to go on the buses. PSTA plans to equip up to 6 buses. The technology costs about $4,000 to $5,000 each. PSTA approached us and asked if we would like to collaborate on this project. And normally I hate the cliche win-win, but we really see this as a win-win situation. The demonstration project has the potential to benefit the regional rapid transit. It's the same corridor. The RRT buses, when we get this project built, could potentially use the same technology. I think there's a lot that we could learn from it. And so we just see this as a great opportunity to collaborate with PSTA. We have money available in one of our 5307 grants. In the attachment that you have with this item, the cash flow summary, what we would be doing is, if you approve this, we would basically just be reallocating some of the money that we have under computer software up to hardware. PSTA would be responsible for the procurement and the maintenance of the equipment. We would be giving them up to $30,000. If you have any questions about the actual bus on shoulder demonstration project itself, Cassandra is here. But other than that, any questions you have?
Questions, anyone?
Yeah.
Chair?
Chair, does HART have a similar undertaking, demonstration project in Tampa, or any of the other counties?
As of right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cassandra, I believe the only demonstration that's being planned right now is on the Pinella side of 275. I think the intent was, if it goes well, District 7 would like to expand it and do it in other locations. So I think they just want to, baby steps, do it here first and see how it goes. That's my understanding. I don't think there's anything planned over in Hillsborough right now for a bus and shoulder demonstration.
And I haven't heard of that.
Hold on. Are you finished, Jim?
Yeah, I just want to do a little elaboration on what specifically is the technology. Do you have any more?
Well, the bustle and shoulder, other cities do bustle and shoulder operations. Basically, the shoulder is used as a bypass lane when traffic in the general purpose lanes drops below 35 miles per hour. Certain areas of the country allow their transit buses to go on the shoulder and basically use it to bypass the traffic. And generally, they restrict the speed of the buses to no more than 10 miles over the speed in the adjacent lane. And so with this demonstration project on 275, the PSA buses would be using this shoulder between downtown St. Pete and Gandy. And then when it approaches these two on-ramps at, I said, 38th and 54th, to minimize the conflict between the bus and vehicles coming onto the interstate, they're going to put technology in the cabinet of that ramp meter so that when the bus communicates with that technology, the ramp meter is going to hold those vehicles up until the bus goes by.
And 38 and 54th, from my own experience, are two of the, in peak hours, are the two probably worst. That segment there is about the worst in terms of traffic flow in peak hours. Is that correct?
I don't know what the traffic, I mean, I live over in St. Pete as well, and when I come up in that part of 275 in the afternoon, it's bad.
Okay, hold on, Cassandra, and then Commissioner Mitten, go ahead.
If I might elaborate, this is a pilot project for the state. So we are working with central office on right side running bus on shoulder operations. This would inform the state about how they could create policies to allow this throughout the state. There is no plan at this time for Hillsborough to do this until this pilot project is done. And in discussions with the RRT project, we would have right-side running operations in this segment of the RRT. So it fits perfectly with the advancement of the 41-mile BRT project.
Thank you. Commissioner Mitten?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is a great idea. I think it's a natural fit for who TBARTA is and what we're supposed to be doing, both from a utilitarian position, but also a collaborative effort with stakeholders. So I very, very much like this.
I too agree with Commissioner Mitten. My only question is, since this is a state pilot, did it not come with funding?
It came with funding for the hardening of the shoulders. And so the Department of Transportation is putting millions of dollars into the infrastructure in order to make this project happen. They did ask for the on-vehicle technology to come from transit authorities. It's a very small contribution for the overall cost of the project.
Yeah, and for a clarification, I see it's up to $30,000. You mentioned 5 to 6 buses at $4,000 to $5,000 apiece. So we would be, TBARTA would basically be funding that for PSTA, is that correct? Correct. Okay. So the MOU is just, they're going to operate it. It sounds like we fund it.
Right.
So if I may, just thank Cassandra and Debbie and Brad from PSTA. Oh, I'm sorry. I will do that later. Commissioner Zio, I apologize.
Thank you. So I guess I'm curious, will it start at 4th? I mean, I'd like to get a little bit more of an understanding of, where it'll start, because I also wondered about those other ramps. I mean, granted, it's great 38th and 54th, but you have other ramps coming on to 275.
So this is a pilot section that we would use.
From where to where?
From 22nd
Okay,
to 62nd.
because you mentioned downtown, and to me, downtown means,
Yes, the current service that we run is our 100X, which goes from downtown across the Gandy. And so we would just pilot this section for information. And then there are plans for additional ramp meters if these go well.
okay. And it's continuous running in the right lane?
It is only if the general purpose lane traffic is at 35 miles or less.
Less.
We
Okay.
can operate in the shoulder at that time.
I just was starting to thank the folks at PSTA for the partnership that we've been able to create with them, and how valuable it is when you can work with other agencies to help defray costs. You get a lot more done, and it's helpful on both sides. So thank you very much. You'll pass that on to Brad, I'm sure. Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
any more questions on this pilot program? No? Debbie, did you have?
Just need an action.
I
Okay.
move we recommend this to the board.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Now for 5C, the master agreement with the University of South Florida. I took all kinds of notes on this, David. Now I can't read them. Would you like to? Oh, this is the master agreement with Qatar.
That's correct.
Correct, okay.
And Brian will explain
I'm
this
up again.
as well.
Brian, okay.
Okay, this is an action item. What we are seeking is that the governing board waive the competitive bid requirement in our procurement manual as it pertains to the University of South Florida, and authorize the executive director to sign a master agreement with USF for professional services. So state statute, specifically 287.057, governs the public procurement of commodities and services. That statute has a section of it, specifically subparagraph E12, that exempts government agencies from competitive bid requirements. So, for example, if we wanted to ask one of the MPOs to do a planning study for us for whatever reason, that MPO is not subject to competitive bid because they're a government agency. Universities also fall under that category of exemption. The problem is our procurement manual is stricter. It doesn't give us that exception. We consulted with our general counsel. He is of the opinion that the board does have the authority to waive the competitive bid requirement from the procurement manual for the purpose of a master agreement with USF. We would like to call upon their transportation research expertise, but we can't sign a master agreement with them unless the board was to waive the competitive bid requirement. Incidentally, PSTA has an almost identical master agreement with USF. In fact, we took their master agreement and we basically took out the acronym PSTA and put in TBARTA. Our general counsel has reviewed that agreement. USF's general counsel has reviewed the agreement. Both parties are fine with it. It's ready to be signed. The agreement states that USF is not guaranteed any certain amount of money. Any task orders that we would issue under this master agreement would still be subject to the procurement manual. So what that means is that if it's $50,000 or more, we would still have to come to the board for approval. If it's under $50,000, then that would be under the authority of the executive director. With that, I'll take any questions.
Questions? Yes, Commissioner Smith?
Whereas typically I'm vigorously against no bid agreements at all, I think this is precisely the type of relationship and collaborative stakeholder that we need to partner with, and would very much be friendly to this going before the board. I think it's a great idea.
And one thing I did forget to mention, this is just, it's a 2-year agreement, so this is not something that just goes on ad infinitum.
Any other questions?
Good
Yes.
question. How is the fee structure done with USF? Is it an hourly rate schedule that comes with the agreement, or? How do you-
Well, say, for the task work order, the first task work order that we had in mind, which is the public transportation safety plan, which is the next item, we would be setting that up as a lump sum agreement.
Are most of them going to be lump sum?
And typically, and full disclosure, I used to work at Cutter. That was pretty much how we did all of our projects. We didn't get paid a dime until the deliverable was done to the satisfaction of the client. So that's how we would set this up.
But they're not for profit. The overall lump sum price would still be based on the same concept of number of labor hours versus the cost per hour.
But
there's
at the end of the day, it'd be a lump sum agreement you've signed off on.
typically a not to exceed price with no profit built in, obviously.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Questions? No? May I have a motion and a second, please, to approval?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to move 5C to the board. 5D, public PTASP, Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. This is a plan, as I understand it, that's required by the federal government. And Brian, do you want to elaborate?
So, in July of 2018, the Federal Transit Administration published a final rule for this Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. This is a new requirement that FDA has come out with. They are requiring certain operators of public transportation systems to develop this safety plan that includes a safety management system. I think we're all familiar with the phrase the silo effect, when you have large organizations with different departments that don't talk to one another. There are these silos. The purpose of the safety plan in FTA's eyes is to break down those silos and make sure that safety is being discussed across the organization. We have to develop one of these plans. So now that you approve the master, well, assuming that the board approves the master agreement with USF, the first task order that we would like Cutter to do for us is to help us develop this safety plan. I need to point out a typo in your packet. It says the compliance deadline is July 20th, 2019. That's 2020, not 2019. Cutter has developed a scope of work and budget to do this plan for us. They came back with a cost of $44,193.13. This would come out of our state operating grant. It's why we sought out Cutter for this task. Cutter is organized into different research teams. One of their research teams is the Transit Safety and Workforce Development Program. Most of the researchers on that team are former transit employees. So for example, Mr. Paul Goyette, he would be the project manager from Cutter on this study. He's the former deputy director of Lee-Tran down in Lee County. He has over 28 years of experience in transit. Jody Godfrey is the senior planner that would be working on this study. She is the secretary of APTA's Bus Safety Committee. She is also an active member of the Transportation Research Board, the Task Force on Transit Safety and Security. So I am personally relieved that we have this resource in our backyard that we can call upon to do this plan. I've participated in several FTA webinars on this topic, and I can tell you that transit agencies across the country are struggling to figure out how they're going to comply with this new requirement. So I am relieved that we have Cutter in our backyard to be able to help us meet the compliance deadline.
Questions? Any questions? Anyone? Seeing no questions, may I have a motion to approve this to the board?
I'll move.
Second.
Thank you. Been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so now the last thing on the action item is 5E, commuter van pool services contract amendment, which I understand is doing very well. And Cindy, if you would give us a report, please, that would be great.
Absolutely. Good morning. Cindy Raskin, Director of Commuter Services. So in June of 2017, Enterprise bought the V-Ride, which was the provider for Vanpool previously. And at that time, V-Ride had 96 vans in service in the Tampa Bay area. By the end of that fiscal year, they had 103 vans. In June of 2018, Enterprise, we entered into a new agreement with Enterprise. And by the end of fiscal 18, they had 129 vans in place. The end of 2019, which we just completed in September, they were up to 150. And as of the report we got yesterday from Enterprise, at the end of January, we were up to 170 vans. So as you can see, Enterprise has made great strides in increasing the number of vans that are out in service. So this agreement today is two parts. There's an amendment to the agreement that adds some clarifying language reporting some of the reporting features. The original contract just says TBARTA and Enterprise will agree on reporting. So we just wanted to clarify some of that to make sure that it's codified, that says that the vans must be reporting their ridership in order to get their subsidy. They have to have 50% average occupancy in those vehicles. Their NTD, National Transit Database reporting, is due to us by the 20th every month and by the 15th of November for their annual report. And they'll only bill us for vans that have reported. So kind of make that a little bit easier. And then there was some language change also to change who is the who gets the reports and is the contact within TBARTA, and then also if any sort of legal issues were to arise, it added language about where the court would be, which court would be handling that. So in addition to the clarifying language, we're also asking you to exercise the first renewal. So it's a 2-year plus 3 option contract, and those are the items we're asking you for approval today to take before the regular board.
Questions from anyone? Yes.
Cindy, yeah, thank you. I was on base just the other day and I saw a nice white van pool on base, and I saw TBARTA van pool sign on the side. Are those signs on all the vehicles?
They are. We're actually in the process of creating new graphics for all of those vans. It'll say Commute Tampa Bay with that new branding. So we're working with Enterprise to put those on. They're on every single van. Some of the people drivers who take the van home and park it in their driveway at night, Enterprise provides them with blank magnets to stick over the side if they have an HOA that doesn't allow them to have a branded vehicle. But yeah, they all have them.
Okay. I bring it up because it's a nice optic if you think about it. I mean, it was interesting because not only one pulled up, but 2 pulled up.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, they got something going on. So
Yeah.
thank you. I just wanted clarification to make sure they were marked on all vehicles.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone? I have a question, Cindy. Have they expanded their routes any? Because I remember seeing a map some time ago. I guess we don't have one today, but are they going into other counties other than just Hillsborough?
Yes, we do have them we have vans that go into Pinellas. We do have some that go into Pasco, Hernando, and I think there's one that goes up to Citrus. We actually have a couple of vans that go outside. There's one that goes down to Sarasota. There's a VA down there, I believe. So And then David and I are meeting with District 1 Secretary to talk about opportunities for working in Manatee County also.
I can elaborate on that. There had been some interest voiced from Manatee County and TBARTA providing commuter services in its county as well. And the conflict was that Manatee's in District 1 as opposed to District 7, which is where we provide our services currently. I reached out to talk to District 7 and notified them of that request, and they seemed okay with it. I talked to District 1 as well. The two districts got together and spoke, and they subsequently got back in touch with me, and we have a meeting the week after next to get all together at the same time and talk across the same table to figure out how we can put that in place. So things look very positive from that standpoint.
I think that's really, really important, so not to be telling tales out of school, but there is a commissioner colleague of yours, Mr. Bell.
Right, I would just want to be, I probably won't be able to be a part of that meeting, but I want some information out of that meeting and some details and content so we can see, our options and what directions that we're going in. So I can take it back to our commissioners because they're waiting, excuse me, to hear, is there opportunity for that connectivity and some things that TBARTA can do in District 1, specifically Manatee County.
So to finish my story.
I apologize.
That's okay. Manatee has another commissioner on another board that I sit on who is terribly disgruntled about anything that has anything to do with regional because they don't feel that Manatee is getting their share. So
I wouldn't say Commissioner Bellamy is disgruntled. I would say this.
I said a colleague of yours.
I know, but I just want to make sure it's clear. It's not me, but I want to make sure that we're curious and we want to see what our options are. And we want to find a way to make it work. That's me. I don't think I'm disgruntled. I just want
No,
to make
but my point being in sharing that story is that I hope you'll go back and talk about the frequency with which we, as a group, speak about the need to do something for Manatee County. So you tell your counterpart.
If I could add, there are a couple other Manatee-related projects that we're exploring right now. Number one is a potential extension of the regional BRT project from St. Pete down into Manatee County someplace.
Nice.
So we're currently getting some cost figures to figure out how much that might cost, and then we'll identify funding sources in order to take a look at that. Another thing that we're exploring is potential regional ferry service. When I was down in Manatee County several weeks ago meeting with the commissioners, I was surprised at how many of them inquired about ferry service in Manatee County. Everybody's aware we have the Cross Bay Ferry. There's obviously been conversation about potential ferry service to McDill and interest surrounding that. So we thought it would be good to take a look at a potential regional ferry service feasibility study, which would include Manatee County, obviously.
Very nice. Good to hear.
Chair, I would add to that I think looping in the Port Manatee,
Right.
Would be a great idea too, because I think all the stakeholders are included. And unfortunately, as Tampa, as all of us know, as the bridge is a little too short, I think more and more cruise ships are going to start going out of Port Manatee eventually, which is a good thing for the entire area. And a very active ferry service or some kind of transportation to the amenities up in Tampa Bay and Alice Beaches, as well as what's going on in Manatee and Sarasota, only enhance the entire part of this community.
So might there be an interest, do you think, of having the, like a Paul Anderson and Mr. Bucaris is his colleague at Port Manatee, I believe, and have them do a
Bucaris.
joint presentation?
Carlos Bucaris.
Nice. Yeah. Do a presentation. to
Absolutely.
TBARTA board, I think that would be very interesting. Okay. Anything else on the van pool?
I mean, it is an action item, though.
Yes. And if there are no more questions, could I have a motion?
Motion.
Second. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Okay, is there any other business that we haven't already discussed? Already? Anything? Maybe you could give us an update, David, on where we are with the cable-propelled transit in terms of getting a presentation? to
We
the board?
have a presentation today on the feasibility study that we're doing for the three technologies. So the aerial gondolas, Hyperloop, and air taxis.
But then after that, is it possible to get the folks involved with those three entities, do a presentation?
We can.
To the board.
So there are various manufacturers that
interest.
provide equipment for cable-propelled transit. So there's an organization in town that represents one of those manufacturers. So absolutely, we can coordinate a presentation from them.
Okay. Anything else from anyone else? No? Future meeting subjects, David?
Not for Finance Committee.
Okay, then we are adjourned. Look at that.
And we'll move right on to the policy committee meeting for Friday the 21st, and we'll call it to order. First order of business is public comments. Seeing none, we'll move on. Consent agenda, minutes for the 17th of January. Do we have a motion? So moved.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. Information items. I believe we're empty there, so we'll move on to item 5. And as you recall, the last meeting, I asked everybody, at least the committee members, to take a look at the employee policy manual for review, because it was an extensive update. And so we'll bring that right back to this committee for a vote to move it to the full board. But before we talk about it, David, did you want to do any talking on this before?
Yeah, just a reminder, again, we did bring this to the committee last month as a discussion item or an information item. The policy manual that exists today was developed and implemented back in March of 2009, so it is a bit dated. The goal was to take a wholesale look at the policy manual as opposed to bringing policies to the committee in a piecemeal fashion. So we worked on this quite a bit over 2019. We did send the draft manual to council, who has reviewed it from a compliance standpoint to make sure that it is in fact compliant with state and federal law. The manual that's in front of you today differs very slightly from the one that was presented to you a month ago, and it was due to some recommendations made by council. The two material changes, number one, are that drug testing on a pre-employment basis is only allowable for safety-sensitive positions only. Previously, the policy was for all employees to be tested before they were hired, but we're not able to do that any longer, and that's a Florida state law, so it's just for safety-sensitive positions only. The second material change relates to our travel reimbursement policy. You may recall that we brought that to the board, which approved the policy in May of 2019. The change is that the original policy involved reimbursement on a federal GSA basis, when in fact reimbursement needs to be done by state code. So we incorporated that change into the reimbursement policy. Other than that, what you see in front of you today is the same as last month.
Thank you, David. And just for an added comment, it does include policies required by FTA and also ADA, so it's FTA and ADA compliant, if you will. So, before I open it up, I'll say I enjoyed reading it, so to speak. Very thorough, very comprehensive, a vast improvement from what I would call our current one right now. So, and then I'll open it up for comments.
Well, I just would like to know when the law changed. Do you know, Alan? That says that you don't have to that you can't drug test people? I mean, I know a lot of different organizations.
It's a little broad. You can't drug test pre-employment for non-safety sensitive positions. So, I don't remember, when we talked to David, do you remember, it was a few years ago that,
I don't recall when it
I don't
went into
recall
place.
exactly.
I did check with PSTA's Director of Human Resources, and they're incorporating the exact same change. She
Really?
confirmed.
it'll be coming, I don't know if that's coming to the board or not, but they're making some change in that policy.
I was just curious, because I have folks that I know that have been, you know, looking for a job or applying for jobs, and every one of them, they had to go through a drug test. So, just find it.
It was a
little
surprise
odd,
to me as well.
especially in the world we live in today.
I mean, Alan, could we get an answer sometime, just for curiosity, when?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Comments also?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Does safety-sensitive positions actually have a definition?
That's a good question.
Bus drivers and mechanics.
That's it.
In our world.
In the transit world.
In the transit world. In our world is what I was curious about.
If you operate a vehicle, I mean, you could have a supervisor that operates a vehicle, that would be a safety sensitive position too. If you're operating a government vehicle.
I guess that begs the question of, do we have to define that in our policies, expand that definition?
I don't think.
I don't think so. That's defined in ADA and other ADA regulations.
Mr. Chair, I agree. In reading it, I was impressed with the scope, and I want to commend staff for the hard work they put in to redoing. There's no less than 12 new sections with language updating a lot of the other sections. There's a lot of good stuff here that was very necessary, and commend staff for that. The only thing that I saw that I wanted to just make note of is section 5.7 with the VTO. We had tried to do something like that in our county and with staff, and there was some feedback as to paying people with taxpayer money for special interest, even at the volunteer level. So the win-win we came up with is giving them time off throughout their regular schedule with approval, but then you letting them utilize PTO if they wanted to be reimbursed for those hours. So they were able to use time throughout the week if they wanted to, but they weren't being paid with taxpayer money for whatever special interest they might be wanting to do. So they're able to do the morale lifting without having the budget actually funded it. So I just pointed that out just to bring it up for discussion. 5.7. Does the other counties, anybody else do this?
We do.
Okay. And it's worked fine, have no,
We've had no issues.
you look at 4 hours a quarter, very good.
But that being said, and I have to go back and look specifically, I think it's mostly tied to 3 organizations that we've
So
identified.
those are approved organizations. How does that work throughout this VTO specifically? Is it just approved through the ED?
The organization would be submitted for review and approval in advance to make sure that if it was not anything controversial, not anything political, to make sure that it was, a good, solid, nonprofit organization.
Well, then I guess I would question, why do we have other not-for-profit organizations? If they're not a 501c3, how do you define another not-for-profit?
So for instance, they wouldn't be able to volunteer for their church per se, right?
Correct.
It would not.
Because then you'd be using taxpayer money. Right. So that's why we use the PTO. They could use that PTO however they wanted to. It was the time frame that they had to get approved. So,
The language of this is ambiguous because it has an or, and to Karen's
Or other
point, if you do
nonprofit.
that, what's the definition?
Right.
Other than 501.
I probably would strike that. I'd rather, I mean, it could be, because if you go to like a 501c6 organization, though they are not for profit, but they're restricted as far as their fundraising, so I don't know, I think I would just feel comfortable just saying a 501c3.
Well, and you could include C4 as well, which defeats the purpose of this.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, in our,
Many churches are 501c3s. Yeah, many churches.
But the point is, in my mind, help support the community. I mean, we, the whole county commission and our administrative staff have even gotten involved in our, what do we call, farm share, feeding the poor or the folks that are really, really hungry. PSTA does it as well. They don't do it, I don't think, through farm share, but there's quite a few times that I've done that, and it's been in a church facility or parking lot or whatever, so.
That typically would be a
Kinda make it-
501c3, though. I can't envision an organization that does that isn't 501c3. My
I
point
guess I need a
is,
little more clarity. I did not realize the church could be a 501c3. That's,
I'm
sure.
Yeah.
but my point is the pure legal definition of that, a 501c4, which is by definition a political advocacy organization, is nonetheless a nonprofit pursuant to IRS regulation.
Right.
So we don't want to see that happen. So I think Karen had the best idea to strike anything after 501c3 and strike or other nonprofit organization. That's consensus.
And don't get me wrong, I love this idea. I think it's noble. I think a lot of people do it. It was just the mechanism that I wanted to bring forward.
wow. So should we add non-religious?
I mean, you know,
Nonprofit.
That can get tricky.
isn't that really interfering in the whole purpose of trying to give back to your community?
Correct, I agree.
Do we care?
Well,
Some might.
council might help us direct.
Mr. Council?
Alan?
Yes. If you answered your other question.
It's item 5.7 from the council.
Page 48.
Page 48, amount of time. So we're talking about the 501c3 nonprofits.
I mean, TBARTA has 10 employees. I think it's important to keep them, let's be real. I mean, PSTA has 600 and some, Debbie? I mean, how many what do we do with our people that are volunteering in the community?
I think Commissioner Mittens, basically what we do is if it's a non-transportation, somehow related event, it's like when we volunteer our staff here through Leadership PSTA did the Feeding Tampa Bay, we were bringing the people here on buses for the most part, and it was here in our facility. So if it has a transportation-related element, we're supporting that in the community, we do that. Otherwise, we take our personal time off to be able to do whatever activities we might be. You know, if you're not representing PSTA on a particular thing, then it's personal time off.
So again, I'll go, I mean, for the county, the approved organizations are the Pinellas County School System, Junior Achievement, and Big Brothers Big Sisters. Just for whatever it's worth. So we basically delineated this time off to.
And again, I'm comfortable with 501c3 is a broad suite of IRS recognized
period after
charitable
that, let it
organizations.
go.
Yeah,
I think so. I'm good with that, yeah.
Like you said.
I just wanted to make sure we didn't look before we didn't leave.
Correct, and I mean, to the point, I think that any organization like that, this has to avoid getting in the realm of potential policy advocacy.
Conflict of interest.
Conflict of interest there, example 4, advocating for Pinellas, our employees, or something like that. I don't think they should be doing, at least on paid time.
And that's where that's where the delineation between whether it's TBARTA funds that are paying the VTO hours or whether it's PTO free speech allocation during business hours that are released. Because there's a distinction
We
there.
all love the First Amendment, but just not on our dime.
Right.
So isn't the PTO issue, though, has to be approved by a supervisor, doesn't it, David? I mean, wouldn't you be approving if someone was going to take off for 4 hours on a particular day?
Yeah, we don't have PTO, we have vacation leave, we have sick leave, we have different categories of leave. There's not any one umbrella term called PTO.
Oh, VTO, whatever
VTO.
you're calling it.
But the VTO would be requested in advance.
Yeah, that's my whole point. So you would be monitoring. Yeah, well, I'm comfortable with that.
So if I read it right, and David, it basically striking out after 501c3 nonprofit, strike out or other nonprofit, and then leave the sentence. You can. So we'll read with a 501c3 nonprofit organization to help support the community.
Yeah.
Is that the way I read it, everybody? Okay, that's fine.
And just for clarification, Mr. Chair, for the board, it's on page 48, if they wanted to still
Yes.
reference it.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I mean, the whole purpose is to create an environment for the executive office to approve volunteer time and to an organization, the executive office of TBARTA feels is appropriate. I don't discount what I do agree 501c3s are broad, but there's probably, I was just thinking through nonprofits that we work with all the time where it may be appropriate for the executive office to approve something that would meet his guidelines and ours. It might not be a C3. But I just want to make sure if we're restricted in a C3 that we want it just in that category and no other, no matter what David, no matter what our executive office believes would be appropriate.
Well, I think that opens a slippery slope in terms of what future executive offices can or can't approve. And we'll follow the trend of the federal government, maybe restricted.
C3s.
language.
C3s.
The language specifically states employees can choose a charity of their choice.
Seeing no other comments, do we want to do a motion to forward to the full board with corrections?
Yeah. Second.
Okay, I got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion's approved. Nice job, David. Very, very thorough. Other business?
Before you adjourn, I'll answer your question. So it was actually a case involving the city of Key West. It was issued in 2014 where the court said it was unconstitutional to require pre-employment drug test of an individual that was not in a safety-sensitive position.
Okay,
It's been
thank you.
6 years.
And that would include, by what you told us earlier, even the operation of a government-provided vehicle.
So a government-operated vehicle, if your job entails operating a government-owned vehicle, then that's a safety-sensitive position.
I want to thank you all for taking the time and effort that you put into reviewing the employee handbook. You all did such a fantastic job. I'm going to have to do it to you again with our procurement manual. This is related to our application packet to become a designated recipient through FTA. We received several questions from them about various things, and we responded to them all. But one of the things that we still need to get back to them on is our procurement manual. The manual, as we developed it and as it was approved, was intended to meet triennial review purposes. However, FTA, related to our application packet, they want us to develop it to address procurement system review requirements, which is a very different standard than a triennial review. Our current manual is not bad. It's good, but they want it to be more comprehensive. So we're going to have to expand it to address these items that they want addressed in order to submit it back to them. So we are currently working on some changes to it already, and we will be bringing that to the policy committee next month. That's our goal, is to have it ready next month for you all to take a look at, and hopefully take it to the board thereafter as well.
So for the next policy committee meeting, it will be the procurement manual?
Yes.
As one of our topics?
That's our goal.
Although we really won't be discussing it much at the next committee, we will just be receiving it. Is that what you're saying?
You will receive it. We can discuss it. I'll do my best to try to explain some of the changes that were made and some of the additions that were put into it. But again, because it's related to our application packet, we're hoping to get it approved and submitted to FTA as quickly as we
Yeah,
can.
and I like bringing it, I like the discussions prior to us reading it, if you will, it sets the stage for us, it puts us in that mindset, and then we read it, and then we come back to the next committee and approve it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, thank you for saying what you just said, because I think I would like, for my own interest, I would like to know, given the size of TBARTA and the number of staff we have and the work that we're doing right now, how David envisions, what David envisions as the need for a procurement manager at this time, given that we have our memorandum of understanding with PSTA, and they have a huge procurement department, right, Debbie? We do. I'm just curious about what the need is, and like some more information on that. I think it would be helpful in an organizational way to just kind of get some feel for where we're going.
And that relates to the position that we're interviewing for right now. So it's to demonstrate technical capacity internally to comply with all the federal and state requirements that we need to. It's to have internal staff on board in order to handle all those things.
And that's a full-time job right now?
Compliance is a full-time job. We don't have the level of procurement activity that a PSTA or a HART or some other transit agency might, but we do have the same compliance requirements to meet as anybody else, regardless of the number of procurements that we have. And I'll add also that this is not strictly a procurement position, it's a grants management position as well. So it's a dual-hatted role.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think the FDA will want to see that box checked in order to grant us our status as a direct recipient.
Would it be possible to be able to, when you have a draft that you're comfortable with, to push that out to us as committee members so we can peruse it even prior to the agenda coming in?
The manual?
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, we can do that.
So I'll kind of wrap up here. That sounds like our future meeting topics right there. So for the next committee meeting, we'll discuss the procurement manual and a little bit, kind of what I would say, an executive kind of brief for us on what we're looking at and how we're going about it. So, and I'll say if there's no other comments, we'll adjourn, and I got us back on time.
So, just before you all head off to the full board meeting, I'm just reminding you of our stakeholder meeting after the board meeting to talk about our transportation summit. Hopefully you all got the outline. Thank you.